Okay, awesome. So I think maybe a cool way to do this is if I do one, then you do one, then I'll do another one. So we kind of switch it up because it's cool to kind of keep that conversation going. So the first thing that I put down as starting with as a freelancer, things that I guess I kind of took for granted and didn't really think that much about until I very quickly realized it was a bad move, is just making sure that when you get a brief from a client that you really understand what they want. Because sometimes, especially if it's a newer brand or company, they may never have worked with a designer or illustrator before, so they don't know what the protocol is for like briefing someone. So they may be like, we want a t-shirt design and we like, I don't know, plants. So you may think, okay, they want a t-shirt design of a plant, but really figuring out what those specifics are and actually having a discussion with the client beforehand just seems to make the whole process run so much smoother, because sometimes a client will come to you with a brief, but they may not actually know what they even are looking for. They may try and explain it as best they can, but it's really up to you to kind of, I guess, you almost need to be a bit of a mind reader as well, because you need to understand, you have to almost get a grasp of what they actually like as people, because that's going to appeal to them and that's going to make the final product a lot more appealing to them. So what I found is just before you just say yes to a brief, it's sometimes good just to have a bit of a discussion with the client, just to talk about it and just kind of see where their head's at, so that you guys can find like the common ground and that you're on the same page from when the project starts, because it'll save you a lot of back and forth later down the line. And yeah, I don't know if you've had experience with that, but I've had projects where I've gotten halfway through the project and then the client just tells me like, well, that's not really what the direction that they even had in mind for the project.
Yeah, that's not even close.
Yeah,
So totally. I think it really comes down to your style, and I think some artists are very, very specific and have a very unique style, and I feel like I'm a bit more diverse. And some of my work is more is like darker and more like hardcore, and some of my work is more mainstream and cartoonish.
yeah.
And then if a client just sees some of my work and he thinks, oh yeah, I wanted something like that, and then I'll go with my other style, things kind of get complicated. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, exactly. And I have that same thing because sometimes my work can get quite serious and it almost has like this ethereal kind of thing going, where it's these characters like looking into space and it's just like inside their brain is like something happening. But on the other side, I sometimes do characters that are very cartoony with like four fingers and they're kind of a bit stylized. And if I misinterpret that brief from the clients and like go in a very cartoony style and they actually want something that's a bit darker or whatever, that's kind of a big deal, because you may get pretty far in that project, and obviously that a whole nother thing is that's why it's important to go through the phase of like sending the sketches and the thumbnails, so you kind of build up this thing so that you don't end up working on the the final artwork before they've actually approved it. But yeah, so it's important to just kind of understand where the project's heading from the get-go. It just makes life so much easier and saves the client possibly some money and you a lot of headaches. So
Yeah,
yeah.
man. And I think, I mean, I like asking the client to kind of look in my portfolio and find things that he likes,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that kind of
that's really,
helps. Yeah. I think like sometimes of making like a web page with different questions and different references from my work, to kind of have like a template thing to send to the clients and kind of,
would
just
be
so
so
they go,
helpful.
yeah. Yeah, I might do that sometime.
If you do, let me know because I want to do that too.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
think it will be like super helpful for illustrators anyway.
yeah. Just as a side
And
note, I've had bad experience with that actually, because I like asking for references as well, even if it's not my own work, just to kind of see what the client is
yeah,
into. But sometimes they'll send me work of someone like Dan Mumford or something that's like hyper detailed and so expertly done, and then I'm just like, I'm not sure if I could do it that well. And then it's kind of
yeah,
a,
but this is great. I mean, this is something you want to talk about before you started working on the project, man. Yeah, I
yeah,
mean,
exactly. Yeah, that's sort of the point. Yeah. No, it's good to sort of try and get into your client's head and kind of see the project as they see it, so that you can approach it in the best way for the best outcome.
Exactly, and sometimes, I mean, I get clients asking for a specific style, which again, from a different artist, from a different portfolio, and I just think it's maybe something, there's not a good fit, and maybe sometimes you just need to let go. And if they want something that specific, just go to the guy that you like his work, you know.
For sure. Yeah, I've had clients asking me to almost rip off other people's work, and I just
Exactly.
tell them, no,
Yeah,
just go to the guy who did the work, and you can actually do it exactly the same.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. Sometimes when that happens, the clients are usually looking for someone who can do it for cheaper, I found.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about money if we already brought that up, because my first mistake is about, I was embarrassed talking about money when I just started freelancing. Obviously, it's something that you don't really talk about in the design academy if you study graphic design or illustration. And I was focused on the creative brief and the whole creative side of the project, but I never felt free enough to speak about my price, especially like in the beginning of when a client is reaching out. And a lot of clients, like local clients, would call me and we talk over the phone, and they want to meet up, and then I'll just go to a meeting and spend half a day talking about their project, and then at the end of the day we'll start talking about the price, and then I realize like their budget is way too low, and there's nothing we can do together. And I mean, we can just avoid that by you're saying something like, okay, this is my price range. I mean, it's nothing like too specific, but just so these are my prices, and try to avoid that, just wasting time. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's really important for even if not with the whole world, just within our industry, for everyone to be pretty transparent with how they handle pricing. Because what happens is if one guy charges very little and another guy charges a lot, that it actually turns the industry upside down, because then clients don't know what to expect. Half of the people aren't getting work because their prices that are actually fair prices are now, they seem way over the top because some guy will do it for cheaper, and that guy might be a student or something. So people who are actually trying to make a living with this stuff, now their prices suddenly seem like incredibly high, and that's not, and they aren't high, they just seem high. So it's important for everyone to be sort of educated about how everyone else handles it. And I found that like reaching out to people just helps so much. Like I recently got a project from a client, I'm not going to say who it was, but I know that you've done work with them before, and I wanted to know, before actually quoting for the project, like where they are at, so that I'm not charging completely out of the ballpark figure that you gave them. And that's very helpful to make sure that like you're not completely ruining the client's expectations. And I think it's one of those things, like in high school, one of the most important things that should be taught but is never taught is tax. And it's kind of like that at design college as well. Like pricing for the work is a really big deal. Like that's what's going to make you make a living. So I think if maybe the colleges put a bit more focus on doing like a few lectures about like the best way to handle client briefs and quote for your projects, how to calculate the amount that's like a fair amount, how to keep up and keep informed about like the industry standard rates and stuff. If that information is given to students, then they're not going to leave college not knowing what they're doing. Because I can tell you now, when I left college, I took on my first project for about, it was probably less than $100, $100, let's say. And it was maybe a whole week's worth of work for $100. So,
that's fair.
But I didn't know any better, and no one told me that I'm totally underselling myself. So I thought that was normal, and it wasn't until I worked for a studio and worked with bigger agencies that actually, I think that the most I ever learned from pricing was working with studios that actually come to me with a budget, and they're like, this is what we're looking to spend. And I was like, that's what I should be getting. Like, that's amazing. So that totally changed my outlook on that. And since then, I definitely have started talking to more people about it and kind of figuring out, like, well, do you think this is a fair price and stuff? And that's really informed my approach to pricing this stuff.
Yeah, man, I agree. And I think, yeah, it's always good to ask for the client's budget in advance. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but it's always good to ask.
Yeah.
So did you feel like it's something that you were struggling with when you just like when you started freelancing? I mean, like when you left the agency, I mean, when you already knew a little bit about the industry.
The thing is, when I worked at that studio, I was a junior illustrator there, so I didn't really get too involved with the projects. But what it did allow me to do is, I think almost all the people that were working there had freelanced before they started working there. So they had prior experience in the industry. So it was very nice to be able to talk to them about that kind of stuff. But honestly, when I left college, I had absolutely no idea. It was completely diving in the deep end. I had no point of reference. I had never worked on a big project or anything that actually had a proper budget or anything. So it was very difficult for me because I didn't even know where to start. There was absolutely nothing. And there's like almost no information on the internet because people don't like talking about money. So you've got all these people telling you, like, you should price your work properly. And then you're like, well, what should I price it at? And they're like, you figure it out. And you're like, but that doesn't help me at all. So I've definitely kind of just figured it out by myself and randomly ended up talking to a few people and realizing that they charge sort of a similar amount. And that was kind of reassuring for me, because like, you don't hear about that from anyone else. So you never know, like, maybe what you are charging that you think is fair is actually a lot. And that's why you're not getting a lot of work or whatever. So I think this topic you can write a whole book about it. You can make 1 million videos on it, and it's a very difficult topic to discuss, not only because talking about money can be awkward, but also because every project is so different and there's so many different aspects to it that pricing for each project is such a unique process.
Well, I think the best tip would be here is just reach out and ask other people from your industry, whoever you can ask. It can be helpful. And next tip. Let's do one of yours.
Okay, so my next one is to not assume that the client already has a very good understanding of design, because most clients don't. If you work with a design studio or an advertising agency, there are usually people there that you can get technical with. But even with ad agency, sometimes you're working with the marketing team and they don't know the ins and outs of like the in-depth design sort of technicalities. And a lot of clients that you work with, I mean, the reason they're coming to you is because you know that information and they don't. So when you start throwing big terms out there, like I can have a conversation with you and I can say, I'm making a file that's 210 by 297 millimeters at 300 dpi RGB, and that's like super standard stuff. And then I can say, well, at the end of the project, I'm going to just convert it to CMYK and export it as a PDF X1A or something. And that's like normal conversation that you have with a designer. But to a client, like, I think their brain would just explode if you told them that. Because it's so, like, even stuff like saying, like, I would like to use, like, complementary colors on your project. Some people don't even know what that is, because we take it for granted often because this is stuff we deal with every day. So I found that using all those, like, design jargon terms with the client, like, sometimes you really have to kind of hold their hand and just guide them through the project and process. And if you don't know that your client already has like a very keen understanding of design, it's better to just kind of explain it properly. So instead of saying something like, well, I plan to use complementary colors on your project, you may say, I plan to use blue for a lot of this project and then use an orange on the important parts to make sure that they stand out and that's the first thing that the viewer sees. And that makes a lot more sense for people than just saying, like, I'm going to use complementary colors. So just throughout the process, being mindful of the way that you phrase what you're talking about, because sometimes clients can, if it's a startup business, they're putting a lot of their money that they have for their company into creating artwork for something like a t-shirt, let's say they're like a t-shirt brand, that's intimidating to them, you know, giving that much money to someone, because they're not already maybe even generating a profit. They may just be starting out. So when you start throwing out all these big terms, they could potentially think, wow, this guy's awesome because he really knows his stuff. But they could also be like, I'm way out of my depth and I don't know what's happening here. And they could like even back out because they get scared. So it's important not to... And you know what another thing is on this topic is I've had a conversation with designers where they actually almost make fun of the client for not understanding these things. And that's not fair. You studied this thing, or you've been doing this thing for a living. Like, of course the client's not going to know what's going on. If I go to the dentist and he's talking about like all the specific stuff about my teeth, I don't know any of that stuff. That's why he needs to explain it to me. And I guess that's our responsibility as people working in the creative industry as well. Like, educate your clients throughout the project, because it's important that they know what you're doing, because to you it's second nature, but to them it's something totally foreign.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And I think it's also relevant for things like sketches. You know, sometimes they send very loose sketches. And I think to myself, like, oh, this is super clear. Everything here is going to be black. And this guy is holding an umbrella. But, you know, the sketch is so messed up that I try to just sit down and write in the email, the description, just like as if I'm speaking with a child. Just like this is a man is holding an umbrella, and I think this whole area will be in color or whatever, you know, just
absolutely.
Yeah.
So what I do is when I send sketches, I usually have a PDF that's got like just my logo and the project description on the front, and then the rest of the pages are whatever I'm sending the client, whether it's like sketches or progress shots or whatever. And the first page of that PDF is usually just this line, if it's sketches, that just says like, these are rough sketches. These aren't the final artwork by any means.
That's really good. Really good.
This is just to get the general idea across and to give you a sort of idea of what the layout would be like before I usually go through, I think... I go through like thumbnail sketches, which I sometimes don't even send the client because they're super rough. And that sometimes confuses them. Then I'll go and take one idea and like kind of flesh it out a bit more and like refine it, clean it up a bit. And that's usually what I send the client, because they get a better idea then of what's happening. And when they approve that, then obviously I'll start the final. But what I've had in the past is clients who see like the thumbnail sketches and they're super loose. They're just like pencil on paper. They're like this big. And the client thinks that's the final. They're like, what is this? Like, I'm paying you and you're sending me this like, I can't print this. Like, this looks terrible. And I'm like, no, this is just like the idea. So yeah, I've actually had clients who I've sent thumbnail sketches to and they think that that's the finished artwork. And I'm like, but it's like a 2 by 2 centimeter little doodle. So it's quite a big thing. The sketches for sure.
It's a pretty good idea to have it written down in like a PDF and have everything like organized. That's a good one. Yeah, I like that. We have 1 minute left, so well, we can still talk about. I'm just gonna stop my.
Okay, let's do one more quick one.
Yeah. Okay, so let's just do another one, and well, we've started talking about contracts, and I wanted to mention that I used to just give like a flat fee, like, okay, this is my price for the project, and without really breaking it down into like the process, what are the stages, how many sketches are you going to get? And you mentioned revisions when we talked. So I want to hear your what you think about that as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think, look, I also generally price projects with a flat fee. Just because keeping track of like hourly rates and stuff can get kind of complicated. I sometimes do a day rate when I'm working with studios, especially if I'm working in-house in the studio. But yeah, I think it's important to break that figure down to clients, and obviously, like, especially if it's a bigger job, I might like set up a formal quote and be like, this is the price and this is why this is how I've gotten to that price, you know, like all the different sections like sketches and stuff, that's the amount, you know, final artwork, that's the amount. So that generally helps. But just in terms of like contractual terms and things, I usually attach it to my invoice that I send for the deposit. I always do a 50% upfront deposit for the project, no matter what project it is, big or small. And then there aren't that many different terms and stuff that I need to consider. Usually it's just a few more basic terms for projects, unless they're really big projects. So it's usually things like the amount of revisions that are included in the quote, because obviously you need a cap or limit to the amount of revisions. Otherwise, your client could just go back and forth forever and just try new things just because they feel like it, and that's going to put you in a very bad position. So I usually do 2 to 3 revisions per project, depending on the scale of the project. If it's a smaller project, then usually I'll do 2 revisions. If it's a big project, then I usually don't go up further than 3 unless it's requested specifically. And then other terms and things I consider stuff like, when the project is finished, I want to be able to still use it as part of my portfolio. So I basically do say that, I still retain the rights to use that artwork for self-promotion. And when I do use it, I might still sort of mention the clients, and just to be sure that it still links back to them. And then other small things like, if the project goes through, if I don't make it to the deadline specifically, that doesn't mean that the project is completely over, and that kind of stuff. Just things to both make sure that I cover myself, but they also benefit the client too, because it means that everyone knows what's going on from the get-go, that all the terms and stuff help everything stay secure throughout the course of the project. And I find that it just helps the client sometimes take the project more seriously, and it helps me take the project more seriously too, because without those terms in place, it just feels like there's just this thing that I've got to do. But when the terms and conditions are in place from the get-go, I do find myself being a bit more, I don't want to say businessy about the work, but I do take it more seriously. This is a job. I'm doing this project for this client. They've agreed to these terms, all this kind of stuff. So, yeah.
And it applies both to you and the client as well. I mean, when you send the contract and when you kind of break it down into all these little details, the client can also know that you are a professional, you're taking it seriously. And I mean, I used to think that, I shouldn't send the contract because maybe it will scare the client or something like that, when I just started out. But then I realized that if the client is not really serious, and a contract will just make him run away, then maybe this client is not a good fit for, working with me anyway, so, because it used to bother me, but again, it doesn't need to be a huge, very complicated contract.
No.
It could be very simple. And where are you writing down the sketches and the revision? Is it in your invoice, or is it in a proposal?
Okay, so if I do a formal quote for a project, I'll break that price down, and but the quote is usually just an A4 size PDF page that basically states all the different deliverables and specifics of each project. What's the client's name, what's the exact request from me that they're trying to do, the stages that I would go through, research and planning, sketches, refined sketch, final artwork, maybe color options, all that kind of stuff. I'll state that in that quote, but I don't always send a quote. It's usually for projects that are a little bit on the bigger scale, usually, where there are more aspects to it. If a band comes to me and they say we need a t-shirt design, I'm not going to send them a formal quote where I break down the whole process. But if I do work with a design studio and they may be unsure of how I came up with the quote for the work, then I'll definitely break it down into those terms. And I found that bigger companies and bigger clients also have a tendency to ask for formal quotes instead of just giving them a quote via email, just being this is how much it's going to cost. They want to see why.
That's also true. And I think it's a good point, when you work with a small, let's say a band, obviously I wouldn't just send a contract and, okay, this is it, let's start. Obviously, I'll talk with them first, and I'll say okay, this is my price, this is what you're gonna get, and then once everybody agrees, I'll then say like something like, okay, I'm going to send you a basic contract just to make everything clear and simple. And this is just a formal thing that we do now, and we start work, and then we start working, and then it doesn't need to be that scary for the client because, first of all, I'll speak with them, and we'll see if the price fits, and then, by the way, I mean, we talked about clarifying the brief, and I think having like a small, like just a few sentences of what you understood from talking with the client, or like this is going to be poster illustration, it needs to be scary, it needs to be dynamic, it needs to have a certain composition, so including something like that in the contract just, I think, makes the client really more relaxed, and like he knows that, okay, this is what's going to happen.
Yeah, it's like you said, it makes them feel like their money is well spent because they're working with a professional. And I think that goes a long way. Yeah.
Awesome, man. Anything else? I mean, we can do another one. It's not that late.
Well, I mean, if there's one thing from my side, I made a note about this, but I think we've touched on it briefly. It's just that if you're freelancing and you don't have a cap on the amount of revisions that you're doing for projects, I mean, that's another note that I made about this video specifically, is just to really talk about that just like a little bit. I've had a few clients in the past, no names mentioned, that I forgot or wasn't aware that I should include a limited amount of revisions for a project. And the position that I was in with those projects is a project that was meant to take me maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks to finish, ended up taking me 3 months, because every time I did something, the client would be like, well, I'm not sure if I like this character, let's replace this character with a different character. So I was like, okay, cool. And then eventually I was doing like 10 rounds of revisions on a single project that wasn't really paying a lot, and I was wasting so much time. And I tried to talk to the client, and I was like, I've got to, this is getting a bit out of hand, like we need to kind of try and wrap this project up. And then the response that I got from that was more like, well, we're paying you to do this work and we're not happy with the work yet. So that's important. If you have, say, 2 rounds of revisions included in the project, or even 3, it doesn't matter, or even 5, it doesn't really matter what amount you are comfortable with. Like, that's what you should aim for. It's just that when the client knows that they can't go back and forth too much, they take the project more seriously as well, because they are a lot more specific with what they ask you to change. And that's important for you too, so that you don't end up wasting a lot of time on that project. And this is like really important. And I think, I will always include it in the contract, but again, I wouldn't be like super, like, oh no, we've reached the amount of revisions. Like, I'll always do a little bit extra without charging. Yeah, I'm sure you do the same thing. But then just to have something to protect you, that it doesn't escalate into this whole thing where it's like 3 months. Like, oftentimes I'll do like maybe a little extra revision or something. If it's something small, it's going to take me an hour or something. It's not going to change my life, it's fine. But if it's like something like they want to completely like recompose the illustration, it's like, it's a really big deal, and I'm going to have to redraw like the majority of everything that I've already done. That's when it starts coming into play. So with projects of that sort of caliber, I will tell the client like, okay, this is 1 round of revisions, so there are 2 rounds left. And what I usually do is, if there are additional changes, I might discuss it with the client first to make sure that I understand exactly what they need to change, so that they don't waste money, I don't waste time, like we can kind of just stay on track. But then I will do an hourly rate for additional changes, because usually the changes hopefully won't take days to finish. So that's probably the only time when I'll actually work with an hourly rate, unless it's a project that's going to take me less than a day to finish.
That's a good point. I wonder if you track your time per project or something, or something like that.
No, I tend to price stuff like more value-based flat fee. So I kind of know from doing, for instance, we used the t-shirt design example previously. I know from having done maybe t-shirt designs for 20 clients, sort of what the general expected amount is for that type of project, unless it's a big brand like Nike or something. So I kind of know what to aim for. And also, because I've done so many of those types of projects, I already know more or less how long it's going to take me to finish. You know, I might be like, okay, t-shirt design, maybe 2 days, 3 days or whatever. So then I'll use like the hourly rates as like my tool to calculate that amount. And then I will send that amount as a flat fee to the clients.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea, but I do recommend you to start tracking your time. I felt the same way. I mean, I totally felt like, I know how much time like one illustration takes me, or if it's like a scene, or if it's just one character. And I thought to myself, like, okay, I know more or less like what's it gonna take. But I started tracking my time, and I kind of realized things are different, man. I mean, I really recommend for you to try it out, and just I mean, it's annoying to always have the timers switch between projects, especially when you have like a busy day and you have like 10 different clients, and like 5 of them ask for something super small, and you just wanna just finish it and get on with it. But
but that's good. I mean, I'll definitely give it a shot.
Yeah, it's really annoying, but I really think like I learned so much from it, and I really like looking back at like the last month and seeing like, okay, this is where my time went, and I mean, I don't track my emails, and I don't track like all the business stuff that I do.
Yeah, just actual working hours.
Yeah, exactly. And then you kind of realize like, hey, okay, I'm not actually working like 180 hours. Per month, as if you're an employee or something like that. So I mean,
do you use a specific app to track your time or something?
I used Toggl nowadays. I also use Timely, which is pretty nice, but I switched back to Toggl actually, and it's free.
Awesome.
Cool. I really recommend. Totally, man. Well, man, it's been really interesting.
I think we went a bit over time.
Yeah, but I think not too much. Like maybe just like 10 minutes extra. So I think we're good.
I think it's good information for anyone starting out freelancing, so that they don't have the same problems that we had.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I really hope some other guys will learn from our mistakes. Hopefully. Thanks, man. I really hope we can do this again with another topic later on.
Sure, definitely.
It's been fun.
Yeah.
Okay, man. So see you later.
Cool. Cheers, dude.
Bye.